Part I Birth of a Silent Empire, 1861, 1865. The Basement in Washington, War Profits and Invisible Men, Lincoln's Signature, and What Followed. Part 2, Steel, Blood, and Rails, 1865, 1873. The Transcontinental Gamble, Chinese Laborers, Names That Never Made History. Death Camps in the Sierra Nevada, Part 3. Money Replaces Morality, 1873, 1890. The Panic No One Saw Coming, Wall Street's First Shadow Network. The Billionaire Class is Born, Part IV, The Hidden State, 1891,917. Immigration Files and Silent Surveillance, Pinkertons, Spies, and Union Blood. When Corporations Became Nations, Part V, Legacy and Denial, 1917. World Wars and Quiet Continuity. The Truth Buried in Archives, The Shadow Still Standing. Chapter 1, The Basement in Washington. Washington, D.C., February 1863. The city smelled of coal, smoke, and fear. Less than half a mile from the White House, in a brick building officially listed as a storage annex for military supplies, a basement room glowed with gaslight. 3 men sat at a wooden table scarred by knife marks and old ink stains. None wore a uniform. None would ever appear in a textbook. Elias Harrow was the first to speak. He was 47, clean-shaven, dressed plainly, but his wealth exceeded that of most senators. Harrow had made his fortune financing troop movements, rail shipments, and food contracts during the Civil War. He never touched a rifle. He never marched. Yet, the war had made him powerful. Across from him sat Samuel Brooks, a government contractor who understood one thing better than patriotism: logistics. Brooks knew how to move goods quietly, cheaply, and fast, often faster than Congress could approve them. The third man said nothing. They called him Mr. Lee. His English carried a soft accent. His hands were rough. He represented a labor network stretching from Guangdong villages to California ports, men who crossed the Pacific chasing rumors of gold and freedom. On the table lay an unsigned document. It had no seal, no letterhead, only a date and space for 3 signatures. Harrow leaned forward. "Congress will argue for decades," he said. "The country cannot wait." Brooks nodded. "The war will end. The question is, who builds what comes after?" Mr. Lee finally spoke. "Our men will work," he said calmly, "but they will not be remembered." Silence followed. That sentence, simple, transactional, would echo through generations. Because what they were planning was not merely infrastructure. They were designing a system where profit moved faster than law, where labor could be erased, and where power could exist without a face. The document was signed before dawn. No journalist recorded it. No archive preserved it. But from that basement room emerged the blueprint of modern America. Chapter 2, War Profits and Invisible Men. When the Civil War ended in 1865, the United States was exhausted and hungry. Railroads lay unfinished. Banks were unstable. Millions of soldiers returned home to nothing. The federal government, drowning in debt, turned to private capital. Men like Elias Harrow stepped forward. They financed rail lines before laws existed to regulate them. They created banking instruments Congress barely understood. They hired labor the nation refused to see. Chinese immigrants were paid half the wage of white workers. They were excluded from records, unions, and later citizenship itself. Yet without them, the West would not have been connected. This contradiction became the American pattern. Dependence without recognition. Chapter 3, Lincoln's Signature and What Followed. In July 1862, Abraham Lincoln signed the Pacific Railway Act. History celebrates it as visionary. What history often omits is how loosely it was enforced. Corporations received land grants larger than some states. Oversight was minimal. Corruption was inevitable. By the time Lincoln was assassinated, the machinery he authorized had already slipped beyond moral control. The nation would expand, but at a cost rarely calculated. Chapter 4. The Transcontinental Gamble. By 1865, the war was over, but the country was fractured. The East was industrializing at a violent pace. The West remained distant, lawless, and rich with resources. What connected them was not ideology or patriotism, but steel. The Transcontinental Railroad was sold to the public as destiny. In reality, it was a wager. Two private corporations, the Union Pacific and the Central Pacific, were granted enormous land subsidies and government-backed loans. For every mile of track laid, they were paid, not for quality, not for safety, only for speed. Corners were cut, bridges were rushed, rails were misaligned. Entire towns were built overnight and abandoned just as fast. At the center of it all were men like Elias Harrow, who never touched a hammer but controlled the flow of money that decided where the tracks would go and who would be crushed beneath them. Chapter 5. Names that never made history. The Central Pacific Railroad faced a problem no ledger could solve. White laborers quit. The Sierra Nevada was brutal, freezing winters, avalanches, and granite walls that refused to yield. Wages were low. Death was common. Then someone suggested what many had already been thinking: Chinese labor. By 1867, more than 12,000 Chinese workers were laying track across California. They worked longer hours. They were paid less. They supplied their own food. When they died, their names were rarely recorded. Company records referred to them as units, not men, not fathers, just units. Explosives tore through mountains. Snow buried camps overnight. Bodies were sometimes left behind because retrieving them slowed progress. Yet when the Golden Spike was driven at Promontory Summit in 1869, no Chinese worker was invited into the photograph. History framed victory. It cropped out the cost.